You are listening to Cinema Rex. It is, just as you thought, an Iranian film podcast. Episode 22, Mohammad Rasoulov's There Is No Evil.
Are we working our way backwards? We haven't recorded in a long time. We took a month, 2-month hiatus? Month and a half?
Yeah, we had banked a bunch of episodes, and since then had gone to Banff, and I had a son born, and 3 days later my father unexpectedly died. So shout out to that man who was a legend and a wonderful Iranian man.
Shout out.
Wonderful man in general, not just Iranian man. But yeah, May has been a roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
But this isn't the therapy podcast. This is the Iranian. Durud bar shoma dustan aziz. Welcome to the Cinerex podcast, a show where we talk all things Iranian film, television, acting, music, birth, death, rejoice, travel, Turkish arts, and cuisines. I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
I'm Farhan Moradi. And I didn't really experience much Turkish arts. Most of my time was spent catching up with family I had never met before. I mean, half of them I had never met. Half of them I had met, and it was a bit of a family reunion, but it was bittersweet because on the one hand, you're kind of reunited with all these people, and you realize how precious family is and how much love and warmth there is when you have a close family. But then you're also immediately reminded that because of the state of the world, especially in Iran, like your family's been torn apart and scattered around the world. So for that, it also kind of made me really angry with the world, but bittersweet for that reason. But I'm grateful that I got to see, especially two of my uncles who I'd never met before. I just want to go back really quick to your pops, if that's okay.
Yeah.
We were thinking about finding a movie that Kaveh's dad did like or was a fan of or had some attachment to, but you mentioned that he actually hadn't seen or didn't watch a lot of Iranian cinema, right? You said that most of what he watched was American stuff. Like Fast and the Furious was something that I remember you mentioning.
Yeah, like if we wanted to do a movie in honor of him, we'd probably end up doing like Under Siege, the Steven Seagal film, or Above the Law, the Steven Seagal film.
Right.
Or Hard to Kill.
Steven Seagal, that's
film.
What it was.
Yeah, he was like, it was like really cheap, schlocky B movies that are like action movies. He loved them.
Single-handedly paying for Steven Seagal's mortgage.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, the closest he, like, even like in terms of a non-action movie I remember he really liked was The Party, which is a very problematic film now. It's with Peter Sellers, essentially in brownface, playing an Indian, like South Asian Indian.
Okay.
He does the accent. Like, this is a white man playing essentially like a bumbling klutz of a fool who doesn't know anything about like American culture. The movie for its time was really, really funny. Like, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but it's so problematic now. 1968 movie. Peter Sellers played the Pink Panther.
Yeah.
The original run. And, you know, like for its time, I remember my dad just thinking it was like the funniest movie. It was a very popular movie. But anyways.
I'm looking up photos of this right now.
Peter Sellers in brownface, and he's just such a bumbling fool in the movie. And I've got a weird relationship with it now because it always fondly reminded me of my father. So I don't want to put it on from time to time, but it's like, it's very racist. Let's just call it for what it is. It's racist in the way all American movies were racist in the 60s. You know
I'm looking at the photos. This is wild. I've never heard of this movie.
Yeah.
You want to dive in?
Yeah. So so why don't you talk about, why don't you just, what movie we're doing?
Yeah. Today let me pull up the Persian title.
Shaitan Vujud Nadorad.
There Is No Evil by Rasoulof, Mohammad Rasoulof. It came out in I saw 2020, but I also saw 2021. I think 2020 it played in festivals, and then 2021 I think it released officially in theaters in Germany and the Czech Republic.
Yeah. And there is a reason, if you're thinking to yourself, but wait a minute, that title in Farsi says the devil doesn't exist. I had watched an hour-long interview with him where he actually describes that. So we'll get into why there's the deliberate mistranslation of evil doesn't exist and the devil doesn't exist.
Not to be misconstrued or not to be mixed up with the Japanese film Evil Does Not Exist from 2023. Yeah.
Which you've seen.
I have seen it, and it's very good.
I'm very curious when we get to behind the scenes. I wonder if they're pulling from the same quote. because it's a reference to a philosophical text.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So like I actually thought about once I heard that in the interview. Yeah, Rasoulof talks about it specifically. It's from a I'll get into it in behind the scenes, but like
Cool.
yeah, I just wondered when I saw that, I'm like, did this Japanese filmmaker also just like take it from the same philosophical text?
Cool.
But yeah, plot summary time. There is no evil. Banned in Iran, shot in secret, and smuggled out of the country. There Is No Evil is an anthology film comprising 4 moral tales about men faced with a simple yet unthinkable choice: to follow orders, to enforce the death penalty, or resist and risk everything. A dull salaryman runs a mundane set of errands with his loving family. A terrified military man wants to get out from doing the unthinkable. A long-awaited reunion of love is torn apart from a horrifying discovery. A young woman visits a dying uncle, which leads to a confession of forgotten secrets. Whatever they decide, it will directly or indirectly affect their lives, their relationships, and their consciences. It has a 98% Rotten Tomato score and no audience score at all, which is strange and baffling, but that's just how Iranian films do sometimes. So Farhan, I ask you, what did you think of Shaitan Vujud Nadorat?
I really liked it. I didn't realize that it was a anthology film until you told me. So for those who don't know, anthology films are when you have multiple short films essentially strung together by some kind of common theme or motif.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the transition from the first one to the second one. That one like shook me to my core, and I was like, oh, damn. And then when the second one starts, you realize what the common theme is, like pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
And so the whole movie is commentary on the system of specifically the high rate of executions in Iran, but it also ends up being commentary on the system of oppression in Iran as a whole, and how people are kind of forced into weird situations, but you can resist if you want, and then some people feel like they can't. So it's a lot of commentary on that, and for that I found it was really interesting. The things that he got away with making this film blew my mind. Like, I don't know how he shot this the way that he did. Like, this looks like a multi-million-dollar movie with proper production design, proper camera work, like proper lighting, good lenses. I don't know, like it looks legit, but you know that he shot this in secret, because there's scenes in this movie where there's no way you would ever get away with it. Like some of the things that he shows in the prison or with the execution, or there's a scene where he's like, there's a character dyeing his wife's hair. There's a bunch of scenes where you see women with their hair totally visible. So massive props to him for this. And I'm shocked that the government, frankly, didn't go after him harder with this film. But I'm glad that he made it out of the country. I'm excited to see what else he can do now that he's not shackled by having to make things in secrecy. But overall, I was happy. What do you think?
I thought it was a very good film. I really enjoyed it. I echo a lot of the things you say. The thing with anthology films, and I genuinely like them more than most people, they don't tend to do. I remember a producer in my film school once told me that they don't tend to do well in the market. But like I've watched a lot of horror anthology films, like the original Tales from the Crypt, which was a show, but it was initially a British film. I love horror anthology because it's like short little horror films. It's like little snack bite sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
There's that film Patty Je t'aime, which was a bunch of different famous filmmakers made a bunch. Yeah. But with those films, you always find wavering quality of shorts.
Yeah.
And I think they're all good. Every one of these short films in this film are good. Some of them I thought were excellent, like really great. And some of them I just thought were pretty good. My biggest thing against this film is I think the better ones were the shorter ones. The longer ones were a little more meandering, in my opinion.
Weren't they all roughly the same length?
No, the first 2 are half an hour. The second 2 are 45 minutes.
Oh, okay.
For a combined runtime of 2.5 hours. So episode 1 is called, it's the title, it's There Is No Evil, is the name of the first short. Yeah, like you said, it's just a mundane day in the life of a man leaving work. You get the sense he's got some sort of high security job, or working in a jail or something.
Yeah.
But then he just, like you said, he picks up his daughter, or he picks up his wife from...
He picks up his wife, yeah, and sends her in to pick up his check because he's uncomfortable going in there to collect the money. And you don't really know why. It's kind of glossed over. And she gets in an argument with the guy. This happens off screen.
Yeah.
You're following the husband in the car, and he gets a phone call from the accountant at the office being like, "Is this your wife?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Really? Like, what's her name?" Whatever, like verifying her identity. And then the wife comes back in the car with the money, and she's really angry that
Yeah.
they never trust her, basically.
Yeah, it's funny too because shortly after that, she gets into an argument with the woman who's making her dress or preparing her dress, the seamstress, and that was supposed to be promised a day earlier because they're going to be going to a wedding. And I remember, like, I was watching this, feeding my child, my newborn baby, watching this movie, and my mother-in-law was in the room. She was watching it over my shoulder, and she's like, "It's so like this in Iran. Everything is a headache. Everything. You want to go to the seamstress, it's a headache. They're like delaying it by 3 days. You want to go to the bank, they have to call your. It's like everything. You want to run errands in Iran, every step of it is a headache. They make it as difficult as possible." But I also thought one funny note that I'd made at the beginning was he literally saves a cat. I don't know if he was reading Blake Snyder's Save the Cat story structure, but like
But I missed that. When does he save the cat?
when he gets home before he picks up his wife from work because his day ends earlier.
Yeah.
He gets a buzz from the neighbor and they're like, "Can you please come downstairs?" And he comes downstairs and they go behind the heater. And there's a giant cat. Not a giant cat. There's a small cat and he has to like crawl behind a boiler to like save this cat from the machine
Right.
in the basement. And I just thought it was really funny because saving the cat is like now known as the cliche, like formulaic story beat in screenwriting. Blake Snyder Save the Cat. It's like to make any hero endearing, you need to save the cat in the first 10 minutes.
Yeah.
If your character saves a cat, your audience will be on board with them because they're doing like a heroic act.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't think he was doing Blake Snyder reference, but
He's gotta
just
be.
caught me and shit.
I
don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised especially because in Iran, all these like script writing books end up doing extremely well in Iran. Like to the point where I've mentioned this on the podcast before. Sid Field has mentioned that nowhere in the world have his books been read more than in Iran.
Right? Yeah, pirated.
Yeah, it's pirated. He hasn't made a single dime off of it.
Yeah.
And he actually takes it as like a point of pride.
I think it's interesting too, like these little moments. He seems like such a mundane guy running these errands, picking up his daughter, promising that they'll go have pizza for dinner, and the wife's like, "We said no more fast food." But despite the fact that he seems like such a mundane guy, I instantly had like the creeps from him. Like I was just like watching this, being like, "We're gonna learn something vicious about this guy."
Yeah, there was something
You know what I mean?
unsettling about him because he's like
Yeah,
he's like pretty disconnected from everything emotionally.
yeah, totally. And even just like they go to the shopping center, the grocery store, and he's like kind of deciding what color her hair should be.
Yeah.
She's like, "But I don't like my hair color to be that way." He's like, "No, it's good. This is the hair color you should do." And I was just like, "Oh, this guy. I don't know. I don't trust this guy."
Yeah, yeah. And for good reason. Then he finishes his routines, he goes to bed, all this stuff. He wakes up early in the morning. He goes into work. He's parking back at the same place that we met him at.
Mm-hmm.
And on the wall, there's a row of light. There's 2 rows of lights.
Mm.
So the top row is all lit up in red, and the bottom row is not lit up yet. And so the top row, one by one, the lights get turned on. 1 red light, then 2 red lights, then 3 red lights, then 4 red lights. And the whole time there's like some Persian poetry being essentially chanted over a speaker in the room. And he's like listening to this like Persian classical music while he's washing his hands and making tea and all this stuff. And these lights are turning on.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, all the red lights finish turning on and they all transition to green.
Mm.
And Kava, what happens next?
And he walks over, looks through a window, and pushes a button. We reveal that these are like the stands that the 4 men who are being executed are standing on, and that button releases the trap door, forcing all 4 men to start. They're being hanged,
Yeah.
and they die. And we just see their feet dangling. Their sandals fall off, and one by one, they all begin urinating themselves.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's what happens when you die in such a
Yeah, I
horrific
guess
way.
their bladders, release.
Yeah. And that's the end of it. I mean, it just kind of ends pretty abruptly on that image. And I thought it was just so horrifying and powerful and
Yeah.
just like a wake up call.
Yeah.
Because it just shifts to that so quickly and darkly.
And that whole short, like that segment is pretty quiet and it's pretty like chill.
Yeah.
And like there's just a bunch of random things that happen and like annoying things that are happening to this guy, right? And then all of a sudden when he releases that platform, it's so loud and you just hear the rope gripping against all these and tightening against all these people's necks.
Then we go to episode 2. The short film is called She Said You Could Do It. Why don't you do the setup?
So episode 2, we are back in a prison. It almost continues in a sense spiritually from where the last one left off. We're in a prison and we're seeing a group of conscripted soldiers who are doing their mandatory service. And it's at night. They're all kind of in the shared room and they're in their respective bunks. And the next day, this one kid needs to go up and he's the one doing the execution. So for this is different than the other in the other short film. In the other short film, he presses a button from another room and a bunch of people drop. In this case, it's conscripted soldiers, and it's a little more intimate because they actually have to go and collect the guy from the jail, bring him over, line him up, and pull a stool from under his feet. And the guy who's tasked with doing it the next day is panicking because he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to be responsible for killing someone.
Yeah, his name is Puya, I'm pretty sure. So Puya is like, he's calling his girlfriend and is essentially trying to get through like networking a way to get out of having to do this. His girlfriend is trying to call his brother, and he realizes that whatever happens, he can't get out of this. So he's sitting in this, what I initially thought was a jail cell. I didn't know. I was like, oh, they're a bunch of prisoners crammed in together.
Yeah. It does look like a jail cell. It looks like a jail cell, which makes me think that they just repurposed one of the jails, like one of the cells, into their bunk.
Yeah, and I thought like maybe he had smuggled a phone and he's trying to find a way to get out, like a last minute pardon or something.
Yeah.
But no, he's you reveal quickly, like the other military guys there are annoyed because they're trying to sleep, and it seems like they've all done this at least once before, and this is the only guy who hasn't done it once. So he's trying to plea and bargain and negotiate. He's asking one of the other soldiers to take his place for him. He says, I'll pay you a certain amount of money if you do this for me. I just can't have this I can't have this weigh on my conscience. And one of the military soldiers is like, no, you don't get out from doing this. Why? Then you get to wash your hands and say you are innocent while the rest of us are guilty. I won't let you. If anyone else goes and does this for him, I will tell our commanding officers the next morning. So this guy's really stuck. And the guy's like teary-eyed. He goes, I just don't want to kill anyone. Like, I don't want to hurt anybody. It's not in his heart to be this person.
Yeah.
And you, through a lot of like exposition, but I think powerful exposition, you're learning that these people are stuck because in order to like have this freedom to not kill, you risk everything. They basically lay out that like you won't be able to get a job. Your military service will be extended. It'll be doubled.
Yeah. You won't be able to leave the country.
Yeah. You either kill someone or you are trapped and you're giving up your freedom and your life even more. So there's the conundrum. And this guy is forced with he's facing the ultimate. He has to meet the prisoner and walk him down a long hall with another guard. And you start seeing that it's really taking a toll on him. He buckles under the pressure twice while doing the long walk because he can't bring himself to do it. The guard forces him up. And in that moment, he grabs the guard's gun, like an assault rifle, and points it at the other guard. And essentially the rest of the film becomes this like pretty high octane thriller of like an escape movie. Yeah. Like he forces all his other fellow guards that work there, not the ones he was in the room with, but other ones, at gunpoint to let him out.
I just want to quickly go back to the guy who threatens to rat everyone out because he refuses to allow the one guy to like not do it.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really interesting position to take for that guy.
Yeah.
To be like, you don't get to be holier than the rest of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cut the sanctimonious bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we're all in this. We're all in this really messed up situation. You don't get to wash your hands clean of this, yada, yada, yada. You have to do it, which I think makes his decision to pull the gun on everyone and escape so much more powerful because even in the face of that, he still defies that status quo, right? And you compare that to the first guy, it's just his job. That first guy can 100% say no.
Yeah.
He could literally go get a job doing anything else, but he's actively choosing to do that. So I think it's an interesting comparison between the first story and the second story.
Yeah.
And to what you were saying about the escape being high intensity, the music really helps in that. That song that plays when he's escaping,
I thought it was so good.
It was so good. It was so thrilling. And I really liked that it was like an Iranian beat and it was done in like this really nice cinematic way. And I like when Iranian films lean into our art.
Yeah.
So big ups to that.
I added that it almost felt like a Trent Reznor score.
Yeah. It felt like Iranian Trent Reznor.
Like Social Network or something, because it starts off, the score first starts with loud banging, and I didn't even know if the banging was something like, was someone banging against the door from another side.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, it becomes a score. I thought it was really good. So it's cool that we both made that note. It's one of the...
Yeah. You're right. It definitely felt like Fincher crossed with Trent Reznor with like an Iranian flair. So
then he finally escapes, and there you see a car pulls up, and it's his girlfriend who has agreed to meet with him. Because I guess there was a note, not I guess, but there was a note that was passed to him right before he goes to this. And it is the note he reads that makes him realize he's going to do this, right? Because he excuses himself to the washroom and he looks at the note and then he kind of plans into action. And I'm guessing what the note was somehow the girlfriend getting a message to him saying, like, if you come and meet me here, I'll pick you up. Right? Is that what we got?
I thought the note was just his instruction.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
And the call with the girlfriend was them kind of being like, okay, like we planned for this. You have to do it. I know you can do it, blah, 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 blah.
But why would the instructions be like, okay, I guess?
No, you could be right. It's because
the note the instructions don't need to be given via note. It's like, walk this guy down the hall. He's already going with another guy that's escorting them anyways.
Right, yeah. Did it give a close-up on the note?
No, it never did, which is why I was like hoping it would be.
Maybe it's meant to be like a little vague.
Then the third short's called Birthday, where we see a young man get off a train station. He bathes in a lake. He shaves, or he like combs his hair.
In the woods.
And then he makes his way towards this like farm in the rural, Iranian countryside. And he approaches a young woman who is the woman he's in love with, and he's spending a weekend with the family. And what we slowly discover is that he is one of these executioners who's been granted a 3-day leave. And in this 3-day leave, he wants to be with his girlfriend on her birthday. And the family is hosting this party, which he thinks is a party at first. And he tells the father that he intends to ask her hand in marriage. He's asking for his blessing to propose to the girlfriend on her birthday. The father says, you have my blessing, but you should know that this party that we're having isn't a festive one. It isn't her birthday. It's that there's been a death in the family, not a family member necessarily, but there's been a family friend who has died. And so we're actually having a memorial for this person. And that's going to kind of hang a whole thing over this attempt of, and the guy's name is Kayvon. Kayvon has died. And so that might make, this whole weekend a little bit harder. And he asks his girlfriend who this Kayvon is. At first, he's a little suspicious.
The father also says Kayvon was Aras's friend.
Yeah.
Sorry, and Aras is Nana's brother.
Yeah.
Nana's the girl that our main character of this story is in love with.
Yeah. So essentially, this man has been staying in the house with them for quite some time. And our main guy, who we're following, suspects that this is like some sort of girlfriend. Have you been cheating on me? She says, I swear to you, I haven't. He's just a guy. He's 10 years older than me. He's been living. He's like almost like he's a teacher. He's taught me this and this. She's pretty vague about it, but you're kind of left believing that she's telling the truth. It's not really like a suspicious thing. And then he's like, well, how come you never told me about him? She won't answer that question. And then when the day of the memorial comes the next day, or maybe it's that same day.
And he asks, was he a criminal? And she's like, no. And he's like, well, then why were they after him? Why were people after him? And she's like, the authorities were after him.
For his beliefs or something.
For his thoughts and his beliefs.
Yes, thoughts and his beliefs, yeah.
And he's like, oh, so he was political. And she's like, no, he wasn't political.
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh, well, you should know that I don't like political people. Like, they're all troublemakers, yada, yada, yada. And then she's like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And then she walks away, and then he goes and finds her in the woods.
And I think before we even get to the memorial scene, which is like the pivotal moment, there's a dinner scene, and we see Aras.
I think it's Aras. I don't remember.
He is clearly the most distraught. This is Nana's older brother, is clearly the most distraught with Kayvon's death, and he has to excuse himself from the dinner table to like collect himself. And it is strongly implied that what, Farhan?
It's strongly implied that they were likely boyfriends.
Yeah, the gay lovers.
Yeah.
I mean lovers, I'm just they boyfriends, meaning like Aras and Kayvon.
Yeah. They were romantic partners.
They were romantic partners, and the family was probably all aware of this, and they were very fine with it, and they were just keeping Kayvon in the house safe, so that everyone would be safe from the government. It's never really spelled out, though. Like, it's never determined. But this is kind of the little small hints you're getting based on the way they're talking around the subject.
Yeah. You could, like, it's left open in a sense that you could theoretically, like, apply this same scenario to a lot of different people. Like, even people from, like, minority religions, for example, you could be like, oh, it's, like, similar to that or whatever. But my takeaway was that was her brother's boyfriend.
Yeah. Yeah, that's mine too. So, like, I think if we're 2 for 2 on that, I'm pretty sure more people have gotten that same check.
I had that impression literally the second the father mentioned, oh, RS's close friend Kayvon died,
Right.
and it's left an impact on the. Immediately, I was like, oh, it was probably his boyfriend.
Right.
Did you kind of
No,
clue into
I
that?
didn't think about it then yet. Because we hadn't seen the boyfriend yet, and so I
Right.
just figured like they didn't even mention that it was they just said the mother and Aras have gone to town.
Yeah.
So like I didn't know like what that was. I didn't know if that guy was a neighbor. I didn't know.
Yeah, that's fair.
It was for me when he had the brother had the emotional reaction at the dinner table. I was like, oh, okay.
Okay.
So then he goes to the memorial. I mean, the memorial is at the house. They've had a few musicians come in to play, and then they put up a picture of Kayvon. And what happens, Farn?
Javad starts to have a panic attack. He runs out he sees the photo. He has a panic attack. Javad is the name of the soldier.
Yeah.
He runs off into the woods and he attempts to drown himself, but he's unable to do it.
Yeah.
And he sits there kind of in a state of shock.
Yeah. PTSD type thing.
Yeah. And Nana comes and finds him and she's like, what's wrong? What happened? I've been looking everywhere for you. And he says, I killed Kayvon.
Yeah.
I was granted a long weekend on the condition that I executed a prisoner.
Yeah.
And the prisoner that I was tasked with executing was Kayvon. And as he's confessing this to her, she starts to grip a rock.
Yeah.
And it looks like she's about to murder him. But then he says, can you take me home, please? I need you to take care of me, blah, 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 blah. And then she takes him to stay in. There's a second house on the property that's kind of dilapidated and it's falling apart. And she takes him to stay in there for the night.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, oh, what did you tell your family? And she's like, I told the family that we had a little bit of a fight. Everything's okay. We just need tonight apart from everybody else.
Yeah. He's clearly rattled though. And the next day it's Nana's birthday, right?
Yeah. So the memorial the day before and the next day is Nana's birthday party.
And it seems like the family's trying its best to kind of take this moment and make it for Nana. You know, they're happily singing happy birthday, but we see that Javad is not mentally there and he cannot come to this happy place that the entire family is. The brother and the father and the mother get up and start singing Tabalod, which seemed like it was going on and on and on. For some reason, it felt like the song was 4.5 minutes long.
And before they start singing the song, RS says, Kayvon is gone, but just as it's a bad day because of his absence, because of Nana's birthday today is a good day.
Exactly.
Happy birthday. And then she gets emotional and Javad gets emotional. And then Javad
he hands her the engagement ring and puts it on her finger as a way of, wordlessly expressing, will you marry me? I love you. And she looks up at her family, and in the moment, she accepts the ring and lets Javad put it on her finger, but then breaks down into crying even harder.
Yeah, and the mom comes over and is like, oh, my dear, here, come, let's dance.
Yeah.
And she's like, I think the mom thinks that she's just like overwhelmed with joy.
Yeah.
But she's, I think, just devastated by the whole situation.
We should say, and I'll save it for later, but there is a moment also when the mom and Javad sitting there talking about his role as a military officer and the things that he's required to do by law. And I thought it was a very powerful kind of scene-setting dialogue scene.
Yeah.
So there's that great moment. Then essentially he wakes up in the middle of the night and realizes that Nana's not next to him. He goes outside, realizes she's gone out into the woods. He follows her, and as dawn is breaking over the horizon, they see each other. And what I thought was one of the most beautiful shots in the entire film is she's standing at the edge of the water where he had actually first been bathing, because I guess that's part of the route. And the clothes are drying from when he had tried to drown himself, the military clothes, right?
I thought the clothes was there from when he
bathed.
He snuck off into the woods and he hung it up there to recollect when he was leaving. But you could be right. They could be drying.
I just thought for whatever reason it was out. It looked like a scarecrow, but it looked like it was out to be drying, like to dry the clothes.
Yeah.
But I thought it was just a beautiful image because it looks like a scarecrow.
Yeah.
It looks, the way they've placed the clothes, the pants, the shirt, and the hat, it looks like someone standing there. And because it's clothes that like flop down, it looks like a shadow. And it honestly is a haunting image. It looks like a ghost. Like it looks like a monster hanging in the
it does
corner.
look like a ghost.
And I wrote that I thought it was such a beautiful image because it's like the specter or the shadow of his military recruitment just hangs over them. Like he's just watching them there in the background and they can't get away. And I thought, first of all, that shot looked like a painting. The discussion, which inevitably ends to her realizing, I love you so much, but we can't be together. He's like, she can't be with someone who can do this.
Yeah.
She says, I'll miss you. And she walks away. And that's where the short story ends. But on speaking of also beautiful shots, I forgot to mention there was one moment when in the second one when Puya returns from the phone call, realizing he has to do it, and he sits back on his bunk bed. The way all the other men are sitting on their bunk bed, it looked like a Renaissance painting. Because
Yeah.
each man is like leaning over in a different position.
Yeah, the blocking in this film is really good. Like the way
Yeah.
that people are blocked. And a lot of times
Yeah.
I don't like when people are placed too like theatrically.
Yeah.
It actually takes me out of the movie. But in this movie, it was done very effectively. Like I've called this out in other reviews before where I was like, this feels like a play. This doesn't feel real.
Yeah.
And it doesn't fit the tone of the film, yada, yada, yada. But this movie does it in a way that's very subtle and you don't notice it until you do. And then when you do, you're like, oh, this is actually very beautiful.
There's also a beautiful line where she says in this moment, or it might have been, I think it's this moment. She goes, I've counted all the amount of times you've had a 3-day leave of absence.
Yeah.
And he's like, Nana, stop. Like, I'm already feeling terrible. Like, I don't feel good at all about this. But essentially, she's inferring to like every one of these times you had a 3-day leave of absence was that someone you had to kill?
Right.
Like, is this the amount of people you've executed?
Yeah.
Which I think, based on his reaction, is also implying that yes, every time he's had a 3-day leave of absence, it's been at the cost of killing someone.
Yeah. And then she leaves him.
And that's the way that last one ends. And then we go to episode 4, a short film entitled Kiss Me. So we begin at the airport. An older husband and wife are waiting to see a young woman come down the escalator to greet them. We realize that this is his niece.
She is the daughter of the woman's brother.
Yeah.
And he's basically sent, this guy in Germany, this Iranian guy living in Germany, has sent his daughter to Iran to spend a week or whatever with his sister and with his sister's husband.
And the uncle, the girl's name is Daria, and the uncle, whose name escapes me at the moment,
Masood.
Masood.
No, not Masood. Bahram.
Basically has been sort of like almost like it almost felt like they were closer, like they knew each other better. Like I always thought it was like her uncle directly from the bloodline, but then he realizes, he explains that me and your father went to high school or university together. Like, oh, I didn't even know you were classmates and stuff like that. And we realized quite early on that there's a reason for her coming here and that they have a big confession to make to her while she's here. This is the purpose of the stay, is to reveal something. And given with the theme of executions and executioners, I thought for the longest time it was going to be something about the father at first in Germany. So I thought it was going to be like from that side of the secret. Like he's here for them. Like
I didn't think that. I thought it was with Bahram. But I didn't expect the secret to be what it was at all.
Yeah. This one for me was a little bit slower. I felt, I don't know why. It took a little bit longer to get to
it was a lot slower. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even just the pacing of the dialogue in the fourth one was way slower than the other ones, and it was way slower than it needed to be.
I think runtime wise, it's the longest one. Essentially, she spends a couple of days there. They meander back and forth as to when is the right time to tell her. They ultimately express the truth, which is that he is her biological father.
Mm-hmm.
That's more or less the entire story, but you realize this because he's getting sicker. He's got an illness. He coughs, and when he coughs, there's blood that comes out. Before this, she's having a wonderful time connecting to this family, this part of the country she's never been to, the farmlands in Iran.
Mm-hmm.
But when she realizes the truth, she's angry. She's angry with her own father, but she's also angry with her biological father because she feels that he had made a choice to abandon her. When in actuality, we realize that he had essentially been faced with the same choice the young guy had been made in episode 2, which was to execute someone. And he essentially fled from that choice. And in doing so, had to give up every aspect of life. He couldn't raise the daughter safely. He had to live in this like remote.
He's living like secretly in this
remote farm. Yeah.
And although he was in med school, he never got his license. So I actually think it is the same guy from the second one.
I thought so too.
Because when he says that he doesn't have his license and he can't open a clinic, he's very coy about it and he doesn't say why. So I think that he changed his name from Puya to Bahram, and then I think his wife changed her name from Tamina to Saman.
Yeah, I wondered about that too, and I actually like the idea, the head theory, the head canon that this is the same story. I thought, and it's really impossible to tell, but it almost feels like the time. I mean, I guess the time travel. I mean, not time travel, but the time shift could work.
I think it works. There's nothing to suggest that it can't.
So, but okay, let's say because this almost seemed like the episode 2 seemed like it took place in modern day because they had cell phones and stuff.
They had cell
right?
phones, but what did the cell phones look like?
It looked like an older model, but it also looked like the kind you might have when you're in military service in Iran at a time where like having phones might not be allowed. You know what I mean?
Maybe, I don't know. Because she's what? Like, I think she's supposed to be like 16, 17, something like that.
Yeah.
So let's say this movie came out in 2020.
Yeah, you're right.
What, like 2005?
You're right.
I think it's possible.
Yeah, you're right. It's possible.
Did you notice the musical cue that played immediately after the reveal happens?
Okay, I read about it when I was reading the interviews later on. I couldn't catch the musical. What is that? Explain it to me.
When he escapes the prison in the second story, he gets in the car with his girlfriend, and as they're driving away, she puts on Bella Ciao.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The Italian resistance song
Yeah.
against the Nazis.
Yeah.
And a lot of Iranians use that song in different settings, in different protest settings against the Iranian government.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they're escaping, when they're driving away, they put on that song and both of them start singing along to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the last story, when it's revealed what he did, and he's like, yeah, you know, I was an executioner. If I could go back,
Yeah.
I would do it all over again. I would pull my gun on my comrades and escape to avoid killing a man all over again. And as he's explaining this, a orchestral version of Bella Ciao plays under the scene.
Mm.
It's very subtle, it's very quiet, it's very stripped down. But as he was explaining it, I was like, "Oh, is this the same guy from the second story?" And when the music played, I was like, "Oh, this has got to be the same guy."
Yeah. So there it is. Because I read in an article about the musical cue, and then this was after I'd seen the film. So I was like, what was the musical cue? And I'd actually had that as a note to ask you about. So I'm glad you got that.
Yeah. I also just want to mention that story, so him being a farmer, he talks about how they have to hunt wolves and foxes because they come after their livestock. And he's like, yeah, foxes come after our chickens, so we have to kill the foxes. And she's like, oh, but like it's not like the fox knows any better, blah 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 blah. Like why would you kill an innocent creature like that? And he's like, well, I have to in order to protect the chickens. And she's like, well, why can't you get a dog? And they're like, well, we did have a dog and the dog got attacked by wolves.
Yeah.
And then he talks about this scene where he was confronted with a wolf and all this stuff. And there's subtext that you can take away from that. And then he takes her out to this field where he has a rifle and he's like, I want you to kill a fox. And she's like, no, I won't do it. And he's like, you don't think I could make you if I wanted? And then she gets really angry and she leaves. She storms off. And then the mom basically off screen explains to her, like, his intention there wasn't to like force you to do it. It's that he's your father and he was going to try to flex his like parental authority on you, etc., etc. It didn't land very well, obviously. And she gets really angry and she's like, I lived my whole life a lie. You guys should have told me. And she's like, I refuse to accept you as my father. The guy who raised me is more of a father than you could ever be. And she's angry at him for like killing foxes and for trying to force her to kill a fox. That's when he reveals, you know, when I was in the military, I was forced to execute people and I couldn't do it. And for that, I'm living in secret. We weren't planning on having a child, but you kind of came anyway. And we wanted to send you away because we didn't want to see you grow up in this society.
Yes. I was just going to say that the subtext of the killing the dog, I thought was interesting. It's almost a metaphor for you have a dog to protect your chickens, which could be any form of authority, even like, you know, safety, like police officers or military. But then the wolves come and they completely eviscerate the dogs and destroy them.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the higher power that corrupts and destroys,
Yeah.
rendering it useless.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's like, we had dogs protecting her, but then the wolves came and destroyed the dogs. They eviscerated them.
Yeah.
And it's like, that could be every system of power and authority. You know, you have one level to protect and then a higher level destroys that.
Yeah.
She says the line, you didn't want to take one life, so you took two instead. Meaning like you destroyed your own life and my life.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. The last scene too, to play to the whole thing, is they're driving her back to the airport, and he stops to pull over because he's feeling sick again. He needs to throw up, or he's got blood in his mouth, whatever. And when they stop on the side of the road, Daria gets out of the car and she sees an innocent, cute little fox sitting in the corner behind like the rocks.
Yeah.
And she lets out a smile. And I think it's like emblematic of the fact that in this moment she realizes that this father, he did the noble thing by not killing. Maybe this guy was, whoever the person he was executed was supposed to be guilty or whatever, but he couldn't do that. Like, even in this moment, this fox looks like a beautiful, precious, innocent animal. And the way the fox looks serene and at peace and her smiling to it almost feels like a sense of like she will come to forgive him.
Yeah.
That was my takeaway from the way she looked at him.
Yeah, me too. Because I think she learns that her father isn't the wolf.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Her father's the fox.
Yeah. So that's where it ends. Those are the 4 stories. I like how two of the stories are about men who have decided to execute, and 2 of the stories are men who decide not to.
Yeah.
Is there any other interconnected tissue between the other stories? Because I kept thinking after the first one that like we'd start seeing crossovers, like that guy in the first one would show up in another movie just on the background, but he didn't end up doing that. But I was looking for that stuff.
I didn't see that, but I did notice that the movie kind of like swings back and forth, like you said, between the perspectives, but also the placement of where things are. It starts with, okay, here's a guy, this is his life. Turns out he's an executioner. Now we're seeing what the day-to-day is like for some of these executioners, right? And then this guy escapes. Now we're seeing what the executioners are like when they can get away from all of this, right?
Yeah.
And then he's talking to his girlfriend about them having a life together, et cetera, et cetera. And then you see, okay, here's an executioner who is able to have a life with his wife, like way off in the woods. But the interesting thing there is that it flips back and forth, like you said, between like, here's someone who's okay with being an executioner, here's someone who's not, here's someone who is, here's someone who's not.
Yeah. Cool. Shall we go to behind the scenes and trivia?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. All right. This is a little bit long, so at any point you feel like interject with thoughts and stuff. Don't just let me ramble on. But behind the scenes and trivia, this is Baron Rasoulov's film debut. Baron Rasoulof is Mohammad Rasoulov's daughter. You know who she played in the film?
No.
She was Daria in the 4th film.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and I like that in real life, her name is Rain, Baron, and in the film it's Ocean.
Oh, yeah, just Daria. Yeah. Why does she know German?
Maybe she lives in Germany.
Maybe.
I highly doubt Mohammad Rasoulof has raised his kids in Iran, given the fact that he's been in prison like 1,700 times.
Right.
While doing a talk for this film, Rasoulof was asked about censorship, where he stated the following: "There are those who believe nothing can be done under censorship. They have accepted a kind of sterility and the notion that there's no way to fight the regime. I have found that it's not true. I first experienced this in prison, where I realized that the regime isn't as smart as it claims. It's brutal and oppressive, but not as clever as it thinks it is, and not as clever as people who want to be accepting of censorship want to portray it. Particularly in our day and age, when you can make a film with your iPhone, the notion that you should accept censorship is even more obsolete. There are many ways you can break the censorship mold." For one example, he said, while filming this movie, a regime officer asked if he was Mr. Rasoulof because he came up to him and approached him. And before he could answer, the guard covered his mouth and said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to tell." Meaning that there are those who are happy to collect a salary from the regime, but they are just as angry as the rest of us about the status quo. So he started in this talk giving like little hints as to how he filmed these scenes, because he did it all entirely in secrecy. Like, he did not have a permit to shoot any of these scenes. So one example was the airport scene in the 4th short film. He couldn't go and film at the airport without getting recognized and caught, right? So he literally storyboarded the entire film, worked out the blocking, and then he went to the airport parking lot and gave directions to his first AD on how to like direct the film. And he directed the film from the parking lot.
Oh, cool.
The prison scenes in the first film are a composite of 4 to 6 different locations, including other abandoned prisons and high schools. So anytime you see him, like when you see the guard, you know, when it's leading up to that final pushing of the button.
Yeah.
Remember how he's walking down a hallway and different parts of the hallway are lit up differently?
Yeah.
Like, he literally used the lighting to cover up some of the parts of like that being a high school hallway.
Oh, that's cool.
So like a lot of the scenes of him walking through the prison are just composites of like 7 different locations stitched together in editing.
Wild. That's cool.
For the grocery store scene, he didn't have a permit again because all of it was shot in secrecy. So they used the permit of a friend who was already shooting a film in that grocery store. So when they were done their day, they would just sneak in with their crew and shoot the scene in the grocery store. In the first one, remember the first one when they go to the grocery store?
Yeah. The second one.
So, no,
I think the first one. The first one. Yeah, you're right. The first one.
So what Rasoulof did was enter the grocery store wearing sunglasses and a hat and like pretend to be shopping while talking in an earpiece with the first AD.
That's so funny.
Because again, Rasoulof wasn't allowed to make films.
Yeah.
He's been banned from making films at this time too. So he would go there, and while they're shooting stuff under the guise of another permit, he would go to the screen, which is usually covered up in the black cover up to hide so you could see the monitor better.
Yeah.
He would hide under there, quickly look at the shot, give his approval, walk out, and continue giving direction on his earpiece while pretending to be shopping.
That's so clever.
Rasoulof said he believes the government is trying to make cinema more difficult in Iran by making it much more expensive and trying to make it more difficult to access equipment. That's one of his theories of how they're trying to just have a stranglehold on cinema.
Yeah, because a lot of the equipment houses are owned by the government.
Yeah. The episodic structure of this film arose from him returning from Stanford and being detained in 2017. And when dealing with the court systems, he realized that it would be very difficult for him to make a feature. He wouldn't be allowed to spend a long time in any single location on set, but he'd have an easier time making a series of shorts. So this came out of the desire to circumnavigate around the government. Basically, yeah, he was just like, I can't be in any single one location for like a month.
Yeah.
They'll catch on.
Yeah.
So this was a way of moving around and keep shooting different things.
That's so smart.
The first story came to him when he once saw a man who had once beaten and harassed him as a soldier when he was in prison. He saw the man walking down the streets as a civilian, and he didn't know whether to address the man, yell at the man, take photos of the man, or follow the man. He was overwhelmed with a whole bunch of different emotions. So he ultimately ended up following him. And while following him in his car, he just saw the man walking around, shopping, running errands, picking up his kid from school. And in that moment, he asked, if I go up to this man and just start screaming at him and ask him why he did these things to me, the man will probably just, first of all, I'll look crazy, but the man will also just like say to me, I was just doing my job.
Right.
And in that moment, he had gotten the idea of the banality of evil. And it first occurred to him. And that's how he came up with the first short film. Was that he just saw this guy, this guard, prison guard, who had beaten him and tortured him. And was like, in the world, he's just a guy.
Going about his day, yeah.
Yeah. The fourth episode came out of a long-standing tension with his daughter. At a certain point, she had wondered that maybe he loves his own profession and career more than his family, and he had felt that he had to sit down and explain it to her. And this was a long conversation they've had over years about his role as a father versus his role as a director. And that was the inspiration for this story. That's
interesting.
The third episode comes from a recollection from a friend who had told him that in his village, a soldier had come to the town and had received a leave of absence for an execution. But he didn't realize the person he had killed was a popular dissident from that village. And he was told that he had executed a petty criminal. So he didn't recognize the nature of the person he had executed, and it drove him to depression. So this is like anecdotal to like maybe not quite the same situation of a lover, but
it's like
similar.
This,
Yeah. He said, I wanted to cover in the film the life stories of those who say yes to power and are complicit, and those who say no and are punished, driven to the margins, and are forced to suffer all kinds of limits on their rights. Specifically with episode 2 and 4, he wanted to highlight and pay homage to the role women play in saying no to the regime. He said that modern women's civil disobedience had been at the forefront and a lesson for all of us in how to say no. So he specifically wanted to draw attention to that.
That's cool.
This is a little bit more, not behind the scenes, but more trivia to the recent events in Mohammad Rasoulof's life, which I think is important for us to touch on. And we'll probably end up getting to this film down the road on our podcast. But after There Is No Evil in 2020, Rasoulof was convicted of anti-government propaganda and given a 1-year sentence. This was not his first sentence. On March 4th of 2020, Rasoulof was sentenced to 1 year in prison for 3 of his movies, including There Is No Evil, A Man of Integrity, and Manuscripts Don't Burn. The verdict also included a ban on making films for 2 years. He has stated that he intends to appeal the decision and will not turn himself in, considering the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Okay, this was at the time.
Yeah. Also, I think it's a lot of this, I think, was came kind of delayed, and I think it was because it was a hot time in Iran, especially with the women life freedom movement.
Yeah.
Because they could have thrown him in jail way before they actually ended up doing it.
Following the announcement that his film, The Seed of the Sacred Fig, was selected in the main competition of the 2024 Cannes Film Festival, the cast and crew were interrogated by Iranian authorities, banned from leaving the country, and pressured to convince Rasoulof to withdraw the film from the festival lineup. On the 8th of May, 2024, this year, Rasulov's lawyer announced that the director had been sentenced to 8 years in prison, as well as a flogging, a fine, and confiscation of his property. Shortly after, Rasulov and some crew members managed to flee from Iran. While appealing his sentence, Rasulov planned his exhausting, long, complicated, and anguishing journey out of Iran, which took a total of 28 days. He traveled on foot for several hours with a guide to a village at the border of the Iranian side, where he waited for the appropriate time to cross. While waiting, he left an Instagram post of a short video footage of him standing on snow-covered mountains. The post said that he was in a safe place after people risked their lives to help him cross borders. Quote, "I am grateful to my friends, acquaintances, and people who kindly, selflessly, and sometimes by risking their lives, helped me get out of the border and reach safety after a long and difficult journey." That's what his post read. He was transferred to a safe house in a village on the non-Iranian side where he waited for an extended period of time. He was then moved to a town with a German consulate. His passport had been seized by Iranian authorities, so he had no documents to identify himself. However, Rasulov previously lived in Germany, so he contacted the German authorities, who were able to identify him using his fingerprints and issued him a temporary travel document, which he used to travel to Germany. This is a month ago, by the way.
Do you think it's weird? Because, like, the reality is someone like him, like you could just Google him and you'll see who he is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, sorry, we don't have your fingerprints. We can't identify. It's like, this is me.
Yeah.
This is literally Google my face.
I mean, hopefully governments use something more stricter than Google to verify.
I know. I'm just saying, like, if everything's been seized, like,
yeah.
Okay, clearly that's who this is.
On 24th of May, 2024, he attended the red carpet in Cannes, where he later received a special award for his film. That's what all I have for behind the scenes and trivia. I just want to say
I've got one more behind the scenes that I can throw in there. In the fourth film, or the fourth segment, there's a part where a song called Mara Bebus, or Kiss Me, plays, and it's also the name of the fourth segment.
Yeah.
So I just want to read a little bit about the song itself. So the lyrics of the song are, "Kiss me for the last time. May God keep you safe, or God be with you. Because I am going towards my fate. Our spring is over. The past has gone. I am going to search for my fate. In the midst of a storm, I will be in union with boatmen. Ignoring life, one has to pass through the storm. At midnight, I have vows with my friend so that I can set alight fires in the mountains." And this song has been used sometimes for as like an allegorical comparison to executions, and it's also been used for people who've kind of escape the country or live in exile. There's an interesting anecdote with the writing of the song.
Mm-hmm.
So the music was composed by Majid Vafadar and its lyrics by Haydar Reghabi.
Mm-hmm.
It was sung by Hassan Golnaraghi. As a student, Reghabi was a member of the National Front and a strong supporter of Mohammad Mossadegh.
Mm-hmm.
After the coup d'etat of 1953, he went into hiding, but was eventually allowed to leave the country and go into exile. When Reghabi visited his friend Vafadar for the last time, the latter played the music he had composed and asked his friend to write the lyrics. Reghabi began writing the words at once and promised to finish before leaving the country. Having spent his last night with his girlfriend, he telephoned from the airport. So he just before he got on the plane, he went to a phone booth and he called his friend and he dictated the lyrics to Vafadar over the phone. His words are passionate and heartfelt. So I thought that the lyrics of the song, one, it really touches on the themes of all of the films, and two, I think it especially touches on the themes of the last film.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Shall we move to critical reactions?
Mm-hmm.
There Is No Evil garnered 18 wins and 10 nominations across international festivals. It won the Golden Bear at the 70th Berlin International Film Festival in February 2020. It's the third Iranian film to win the top award at the Berlinale. Do you know what the other two are?
Let me think about this. It was the Golden Bear.
Mm-hmm. Top prize at Berlinale. Or Berlin.
Another one was Offside.
No.
Didn't it? I thought we mentioned in the Offside episode that it won the Golden Bear.
I think it won Silver Bear.
Oh. How many of the other two did we review on the podcast?
One of them.
Is it a Kiarostami film?
No.
Oh. Is it Hit the Road?
Nope.
Okay. What is it?
You're going to kick yourself. It's A Separation.
Oh, right. Right.
Panayi's Taxi, 2015, which we haven't done yet.
Oh, okay.
Or I think it's also called Taxi Tehran or Tehran Taxi.
Cool.
It also won the 2020 Audience Award at Sao Paulo International Film Festival. It won the Sydney Film Prize in November 2021, and Rasoulof was unable to attend as he was jailed and banned from leaving Iran at the time.
Classic.
There's also like 15 other awards it won, but those were the big ones of note.
Yeah.
And yeah, just like a widely celebrated film all around.
Cool.
That's it. Power through it. Deeper analysis.
Yeah, let's do it.
What was your thoughts on what the title's referring to? I have his exact words, so I could just jump into it. But I'd like to know before I answer it. I'll just tell you. I'm interested in what you think the title means.
The first one was called "There Is No Evil," right?
Yeah, I meant the title for the entire film, the anthology.
Oh. Is it a reference to like a Godard quote or something?
No, should I just say it?
I don't know. I think is it just that it's a matter of perspective and that like
Kind of. So on the title of the film, Rasoulof said that when I was thinking about the title, I was thinking about something larger in terms of its meaning. Thinking about how a German philosopher named Hannah Arendt talked about the banality of evil and how we think of it and attribute it to this outside, larger than life, despicable, guilty phenomenon. We always give it a name like the devil or Satan. But I want to use the title that brought to mind not just Arndt's idea, but also the notion of individual responsibility. We had an opportunity to give the title one that was aesthetically pleasing, but he was tickled with the idea that there was a sense of irony behind the title. That like showing all these horrific acts, but then calling it There Is No Evil, to him sounded like there was something playfully ironic about it. But he initially wanted to give it the title, in which he kept in Farsi, There Is No Satan, but he thought that evil plays towards this, again, the banality of it and how it's personal responsibility. It's not that the devil exists. Evil is within the people's personal responsibility. Rasoulof explained that in addition to the film being about people taking responsibility for their actions, that each story is based on a personal experience he had. As responsible citizens, do we have a choice when enforcing the inhuman orders of despots? As human beings, to what extent are we to be held responsible for carrying out those orders? Where does the duality of love and moral responsibility leave us? That's what he said about it.
I'm curious what the reasoning was for the Hamaguchi evil does not exist. Like what the reasoning was for that title.
Well, Hannah Arendt is the German philosopher that he was deliberately taking the title from. There was some stuff you had mentioned earlier about how you wanted to talk about in deeper analysis.
Some things that I noted. The soldiers are sleeping in that jail cell, right? I think it speaks to the fact that like even these young men who are conscripted soldiers are kind of forced into it. They're in a jail of their own in a sense. Oh, yep. The dilapidated house that they see where he's like, oh, we should just leave this. And she's like, no, we should stay and try to fix it.
I see what you get it. Yeah. I didn't catch that.
Do you think that could be a reference to like the state of Iran?
Yes, of course. And I didn't catch it until you just mentioned it. That's very good.
And then they spend the night in the dilapidated house, and that's what that night ends up being their last night together.
Yeah. I had one in that same scene right before that. She's like, they're talking about the different flowers that she's collecting. Remember, she makes a crown of flowers that he puts on her head.
Yeah.
She puts on his head. She calls them pointless flowers. And he's like, what do you mean pointless flowers? And I'm like, oh, they're just like pointless flowers. They serve no purpose. They're just being there beautiful. And I wondered if that was his, like, this is a very cynical reading of it, but like, are the pointless flowers the lives being lived by the youth in Iran? That are these beautiful flowers that live in Iran that are ultimately forced to living these not pointless lives as in their lives don't have points, but in the government's eyes, they're just kind of like, they're not fulfilling their maximum potential because of this threshold that's being forced upon them.
Maybe.
Just one interpretation. The other one was also, I mentioned the dogs protecting the farm that are then ravaged by wolves.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
I was curious about this one too. I couldn't extrapolate anything from this, but there's something to be said about the bees. The hives, like remember the farm is like they're bee farmers and they're like using all these hives. And there's one scene where like the uncle kind of takes the young girl aside and like teaches, or actually it's the aunt doing it, teaching how the queen bee stores the eggs and how they protect themselves to keep warm in the winter. And I didn't really get what to take from.
I didn't. I was trying to look for something in that, but I couldn't find it. I found more in the stuff with the fox and the wolf and the dog. The bee, I didn't catch as much. I also I wrote down in my notes, and this isn't like super deep. I just thought it was a really effective way to show the relationship between Nana and, was his name Javad?
Yeah.
So the farmer's daughter, her hair is visible like pretty much immediately, and they don't like we don't see them have sex, we don't see them kiss, but Rasoulof demonstrates their affection and intimacy with such poise that you're left with no ambiguity as to how they feel about one another when they first meet.
Yeah.
Like she immediately pulls him in and they're just like sitting there together and they're just so like tender and sweet together that you know immediately. And then even later he's like lying back and she's putting pomegranate seeds on his face and she's feeding him the pomegranate
I
seeds.
thought that was a beautiful image.
Yeah, I thought so too. And she like tells, and then in that moment, she tells him that she's in love with him and that she adores him and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that it was just such an effective way to show that affection between characters without anything gratuitous.
Yeah. Yeah. Why didn't you put pomegranate seeds on the face in Toronto?
I didn't think about it.
Damn you.
Okay, I have a question for you. There's the scene where in the fourth story, there's a scene where the father is telling the daughter about like shooting the foxes and the wolves and stuff, and she's protesting, and he says, "I'm protecting my farm and my family."
Yeah.
And then he says, "What if I forced you to? You think forcing you would be hard?" And then she like kind of storms off. What do you think that was about?
Oh, I think it's quite literally he's thinking about the fact that he was forced to this decision and that he's like slightly annoyed that she thinks that if she's faced with the same decision, she's just making it seem so like banal and easy. Like, oh, I don't have a problem with this. And it's like, yeah, if you were forced to. I think he's just getting annoyed with that, right?
Oh, maybe. And maybe he's like trying to test her resolve and see if she would make the same decision that he did, right? I wonder if he actually wouldn't make her do it in the end. And he's just trying to test her resolve the way that his was tested. And that might be why the mom used this as an opportunity to tell her the truth. You know what I mean?
I never thought he was really going to do it. I just think in that moment he was overcome with emotion of her being like
defiant.
She's just so flippant. She's so flippant about it. And it's like, oh yeah. Like if you were like, it's almost like he's having a moment of like, it's the PTSD. Oh, and if you were being forced, you wouldn't do it. Like, I'll force you. And he's all of a sudden he's like, oh, I just lost my temper.
That's how I felt. But now looking back on it, I'm like, maybe he's actually impressed with her. He's just like terrible at trying to
maybe
like read the moment and test her, because it's kind of like the same situation that he was in, right?
Yeah, I just thought of it as he just like had a momentary lapse of like,
maybe
this is not as easy as you think, kid. You think you know everything? You think you know everything? Like, no. Okay, what if I forced you? Huh? What would you do then? Because then he like even like approaches her really close face to face, and he like lifts her hands, like he wants to like he doesn't know what he wants to hug her, embrace her, like give her like a loving kiss on the cheek. Like he's just like overwhelmed with all these complicated emotions, and he's just losing. Just doesn't know how to handle the situation right now. He wants to tell her the truth. He wants to lie to her. Like he just can't figure out his shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting scene, interesting short, interesting film. Best scene.
I can go first. My best scene was the end of the first short.
Mm-hmm.
I think because you have this like long drawn out setup of like this guy, this family man just like running through his daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And then it ends with the reveal that he's an executioner, and it hits so hard and so loud and so suddenly that it really shook me out of my seat, and it set up the rest of the film. And it was very effective in doing that. So that is my favorite scene in the film.
I agree. The lead up and ending to that first short is so harrowing.
Yeah.
Harrowing?
Yeah,
it was for me like a big stand up.
Cool.
I also want to just give a specific shout out to the that haunting image. Like the scene works really well too, but just the physical image of Nana breaking up with Javad and the clothes hanging like a scarecrow.
Yeah.
To me was like the most beautiful shot in the film. Because it just was like, again, harrowing. Least favorite scene.
What was your least favorite?
Him confessing, and I actually meant to mention this in the second one when we were talking about the plot summary.
Okay.
Or when we were talking about our reactions. Him confessing that he killed Kayvon, I didn't like at all.
Why?
And here's the reason. Not because I think, he should have protected himself. I think he doesn't deserve the relief that comes with his confession. In doing that, he brings her down to and ruins essentially not her life, but like destroys. It's her now becomes his heartbreak becomes her heartbreak. His sadness and depression.
Do you still hate it knowing that he doesn't get absolution?
Yes, because I think if you are going to commit such a horrifying act, maybe part of your punishment is to live with it and live with that secret.
Right.
And as painful as that is, you don't get absolution or even relief of confessing. You aren't earned that. You don't get to destroy other people's lives. Look, I know it'd be dishonest in a way. That's why it's a tricky thing.
Right.
But it's like you're fucking up her life now.
Right.
And you're destroying her. Like, she'll never recover from this now. So
Right.
now they're shared in this pain.
Right.
And she didn't do anything. She doesn't deserve that. So maybe from my perspective, it's like, you don't deserve to confess, to even get a glimmer of like, I need to say this out loud. You've done the horrifying act. You live with it and you swallow it and you keep it to yourself. Not because, oh, don't tell her because you want to stay with her. But I just felt like him sharing this depression and anxiety and PTSD isn't fair to her.
I can still understand that he had to do it because he probably felt like he was like drowning in that moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think him trying to kill himself by drowning is not coincidence. But I think that the fact that she leaves him despite that kind of makes that scene okay for me.
Yeah.
Because if he has that confession and she's like, okay, don't worry, we'll push through this, we'll make it work.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think I would be there with you and I would hate that scene. But like, I think it's realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like, it's not that I don't like the filmmaking of that scene. I like that scene because I think that it would have happened like that because this guy
totally
has shown us that he's a scumbag.
It frustrated me from the character perspective. It's like,
sure, yeah,
you don't deserve any sort of reprieve from this.
Would you have rewritten that scene differently?
I think there's something interesting to show from a film of them continuously trying to persevere and fight through the sadness and then celebrate a birthday and him confessing that he wants to love her and propose her while keeping all of this buried. Like, that's another film. It's a different film, but I think there's something interesting to try. There's also really interesting something to add of like, show him struggle to tell her for a few scenes. He just tells her right away. You know what I mean?
Like, he just blurts it out.
The next time he tries to drown herself, she finds him and he tells her. And I was like, oh, you don't even want to live in a beat of him trying to like, there was no time where he was around that family and had the secret. And I think dramatically, that's an interesting choice you could have made.
I don't mind it because I do think that it either goes one way or the other.
Yeah.
When people want to confess something, it's either they blurt it out or they're delaying, and then it eventually gets like ripped out of them.
Yeah. Right.
So I didn't mind it.
All right.
My least favorite, it's got to be something in the last story.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't find one specific moment because the thing that bothered me about the last story was that the pacing in that final story was just not good. It was way too slow. Like you said, it meandered quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think the story kind of got lost a bit in the minutia of trying to like paint their farm life.
Yeah.
So maybe the first scene when they're like by like the beehive and they're like talking about like, oh yeah, like we had this and we have that and there's these bees and yeah, you know, this is like this. And they're like explaining all that stuff that I'm like, I understand that you're trying to paint the fact that like they have a boring life on the farm. But now I'm bored.
Yeah.
I like that at the end when she finds out, her reaction in that scene really changes the pacing because now she's like livid and she's just ranting.
Yeah.
And that was great. And it was actually kind of a breath of fresh air in a sense.
Yeah.
But that also kind of retroactively made me not like the way that some of the scenes were done earlier in that short.
Sweet. Damn, that's poetry. We discuss our favorite quote.
Nice.
For me, it's the scene with Javad and Nana's mother. When she says to him, they're sitting and talking, she goes, so then why do you do it? Referring to his military service. He says, if I don't, my military service becomes longer. You can't do anything until you finish your service. You can't work, earn money, leave the country. After all, military service is a law. She says, who decides the law? He says, I don't know. Anyone who has more power than us. I have no choice but to do it. It's only 2 years. And even if I wanted to stop, I don't have the power. And I'm just condensing it a bit. After a little bit of discussion on power, she ultimately says, your power is in saying no. And he says, if we say no, they'll destroy our lives. I like it so much because both sentences are completely true, yet fly in complete contrast with one another. And this is the essence of the borderline farcical impossibility of the hypocritical catch-22 of life in Iran, is that they're both right. She goes, your power is in saying no. And then he says, if we say no, they'll destroy our lives.
قدرت تو نگفتنته.
نه بگیم که زندگیمون رو نابود کرد.
That's solid. I had a tie between two quotes, and that was actually one of them. And the other one's in the second story, where one of the soldiers is trying to convince the guy to just like get up and do the execution in the morning. He says, "This is Iran. What's this about law? Law here is money, corruption, and nepotism. If they say pull the stool and kill, you must pull the stool and kill. Otherwise, they'll make your friend pull the stool from under you," which I thought was pretty dope.
اینجا ایران قانون کدومه؟ قانون یعنی پول، پارتی، پیشونی. گفتن بکش بکش، باید بکشی بکشی. وگرنه رفیق جونجونیت میفرستتت بالا پای دار، خودش زیر پاتو خالی میکنه.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, that's when they're all sitting in the bed talking, right?
Yeah. They're in their respective beds. Everyone, it's not 5 people in one bed. Just painting the scene.
Favorite performance? Mine's Puya, which, okay, according to IMDb, is played by an actor named Kaveh Ahangar. But, like, that can't be his real name, can it?
Why not?
Well, because Kaveh Ahangar is literally the mythical Shahnameh character. Like, I grew up, when I was told my name is Kaveh, my parents told me you're named Kaveh after Kaveh Ahangar, Kaveh the blacksmith.
Oh.
The joke also was that, like, I didn't know what Ahangar was, so I was like, oh, but my name's Kaveh, but I don't sing. And my parents were like, what are you talking about? I'm like, Ahangar. They're like, oh, you mean Ahang? No, it's not. It's Ahangar, and it's blacksmith. So
that's right. Ahangar instead of Ahangar. Yeah.
Yeah, Ahang.
Ahang instead of Ahan. Yeah.
It's Kaveh the blacksmith. This guy's credited as Kaveh the blacksmith. I know Ahangar could be his last name, but that's literally the Shahnameh character. So it leaves me to wonder. It's like if his name was Alexander the Great or something.
Right.
Like, I'm like wondering, is this a pseudonym or something?
Maybe. I wonder, it could be a pseudonym. It could be an example of them trying to give him a fake name so that he doesn't get in trouble.
I guess, but then like nobody else has got the fake name. Or I don't know. But anyways, Puya, who, if I did also should have explained who Puya was. Puya is the soldier in the second film who is conflicted about having to pull the stool, can't do it, collapses, then holds every one of the other guards up at gunpoint with the assault rifle.
Right, yeah.
That thriller one in second, I thought that was the most powerful scene because he goes through a range of emotions from despair, sadness, fear, anger, rage. Like that whole piece was really fascinating, and I think that actor like just crushes it.
Yeah, no, he's excellent. My favorite, I think, is Mahtab Servati, who plays Nana.
Oh yeah.
She was excellent, and she was able to show compassion and love on one side. She showed her anger, she showed her sadness and grief, and she was able to effortlessly go between all these different emotions. So I'm giving it to her.
Nitpicks, hot takes, what aged poorly?
I have a few.
Go for it.
Okay, in the first one, the very first story, I think the daughter character was cast a little too old.
Okay.
Because she's like constantly complaining and being defiant. Her character is at an age where she should know better. So it doesn't come off as like, oh, what a cute, funny kid. It comes off as, wow, this child is a brat, is a spoiled brat. Because they're like old enough that they shouldn't be saying some of the things that they're saying. They should know better. They should know to have a bit of a filter and to have a little bit more respect. And she's just like so annoying. And I'm like, I hate this kid so much. And it's not a performance thing. I honestly think it's just either A, the dialogue should have been revised to reflect the age of the actor that they cast, or B, they should have cast a younger actor.
Right.
Did you feel that?
No, because I'm starting to wonder if you just spend time around way too well-behaved kids and you just don't know how bratty a lot of kids are.
Bro, your daughter is better behaved than that girl is. And that girl's twice the age of your daughter.
Yeah, but then like I also know exactly who my daughter is, and sometimes she is not well-behaved at all. I appreciate the compliment, but she sometimes sucks as a child. That's fair. One of my nitpicks is I think the more interesting tableaus are the shorter ones, and I felt that the two that he's invested the most time with were less interesting.
Yeah. And the funny thing is I think that fourth one, if it was trimmed, like if a lot of the dead air was just like cut out, if it was edited more tightly, I think it could have been better. I don't think it needed to be as long as it was. Like that, and in general, the movie being like 2.5 hours long, like it did not need to be that long.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. I will say I didn't mind the pacing and length of the third one. The fourth one in particular, though, I was like, this one could have been like 10 minutes. Like,
no, I didn't mind the pacing of the third one either, but I even still think compared to the first one, it like Like the better ones were the shorter ones, in my opinion. Like I think I like numbered 1 and 2 more than 3 and 4. You know what I mean?
I bet you if I cut down that fourth one into like a 10-minute tight short, I think you would put it in contention with with one of the first two.
Yeah. I have a pretty huge nitpick or hot take. I want to give you a pretty big hot take. We don't really do hot takes that often.
Okay. Hit me.
I think the order should have been swapped around. I think 1 and 4 should have been flipped. And hear me out why.
Okay.
Imagine if after seeing the first 3 and you're on the 4th one, which is a mundane story of a guy's life, and you don't know why we're following this guy's life. You cut out that he's leaving a prison. You just start with him picking up his wife.
Mhm.
And the last shot of the film is this guy pouring his tea, pushing the button, and killing 4 men. And then you cut to credits. And that's the last image you're left with. First of all, a way more powerful ending, right?
Maybe.
Second of all, I think the 4th one coming first, you set up a story of a family, then you slowly reveal what this guy's done. So you don't know it's a story about an executioner.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay,
And then-
okay.
So that would be the 4th one.
And then it kind of goes into the flashback in the second one.
But you won't even know it's a flashback yet till he pulls the gun, right?
Right.
Because you'll be like, oh, this is a story about another person. But then when he pulls the gun, you're like, oh, this is this guy.
Right.
Then you go to the 3rd story, which could stay where it is. And the 4th story is this guy. I just think that like with these shorts, your first and fourth, if your last one is the strongest one, it really leaves an impact.
That's true. In this case, I think the weakest one was the last one.
Yeah, exactly. But you'll have the audience patience more for a first one if it's the weakest one because they'll be like, okay, that was all right. That's pretty good. But then you leave the theater with that last image of the guy mundanely pushing the button and the 4 feet hanging and pissing themselves.
Maybe.
I just think that's an interesting way of considering reordering the structure because I think the film feels suddenly very different with just that simple change.
I think if you do that, it kind of gives away the twist of the first one. Because if you're watching the first one after you know that, okay, all these shorts are about executions and executioners,
Yeah.
I think you know, okay, this guy's an executioner. But the way that it's currently ordered, I think that scene hits as hard as it did because it starts off the film. I think maybe it just needs a better ending. I have a nitpick about the 4th one.
Mm-hmm.
So this girl either left Iran when she was a baby or she was raised in Iran or whatever. Well, we know that for sure because she's the one guy's daughter, right? And she comes to Iran and she's like fascinated by Iran and she thinks wearing the hijab is like kind of novel and all this stuff. Her Farsi is way too good for a kid who's never been to Iran. Her accent is impeccable. Her grammar is amazing. And she's also using vocabulary and sayings that are contemporary to Iran.
Okay.
A lot of times a massive tell for diasporic kids, one is obviously like accents and vocabulary. Another thing is the language that you and I use when we speak Farsi is Farsi from like 30, 40 years ago, right?
Right. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So we're not using the sayings and the slang of contemporary Iran. So I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, this is clearly a person who's been like in and out of Iran or whatever,
Yeah.
at the very least.
Nope, that's fair.
Did you have that thought at all? Were you like,
I had more like I didn't think she was the best actor. I didn't think her performance was
it
that
was
solid.
like a Sofia Coppola
Yep.
type of situation?
Kind of felt that way.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I think both of our nitpicks there align with the fact that it's Rasulov's daughter.
I also thought I would have liked it if this is a personal taste, but I would have loved if each of the stories were a little bit more closer connected. If the other ones had almost like, I don't know how you would have done it, but like if Javad was one of the security guards in the bed with the other guys, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe you could do something like that. It would be just interesting to almost feel like a sense of universality.
Mm-hmm.
Double feature lineup. I'll just say 3, and you could take one of them. I think
They're gonna be
Rasoulof-
like obscure French films that I've never heard of.
No, you'll probably, I don't know, you might have heard of one of them. Rasoulof, in my opinion, is one of the angriest directors, rightfully so, and I'm glad, I mean that as a compliment, in Iranian films. And
Okay.
in thinking about angry directors, I want to draw attention to a film called The Nightingale by Jennifer Kent. She's the director who made The Babadook, the horror film.
Okay.
It's a young woman in 1800s Australia who essentially, it's a revenge story. After something's happened to her, I don't want to go into specific details, but a British officer does something to her and her family, and she's going out to get revenge. And it is such an angry film. It like calls out Australian history of the indigenous people in Australia. It calls out British imperialism. It calls out Australian hypocrisy culturally. She's an Australian director who's like calling out its people in a very angry way. It is one of the most horrific films to watch in a good way. I mean, some of the most horrific acts of violence I've ever seen depicted on film happened in The Nightingale. And this was her second feature. This is after the success of Babadook. They're like, okay, you know, like make the film you want to make. And she makes this. And I'm like, oh, damn, she is an angry filmmaker calling out hypocrisy.
Did she start as an actor?
I don't know if she was known as an actor, though. Like,
she has like tons of credits as an actor in Australia.
The other one I want to say is the film called Wild Tales by Damien Ziffron. And it's a half French, half Belgian film. It's like this. It's an anthology. 6 short stories that explore extremities of human behavior involving people in distress. It is mostly played like a comedy. I think all of them, or almost all of them, are comedic, but it's in this exact same structure, 6 short stories, not connected in any other way except for the themes. And it's really funny, incredibly enjoyable, and it was nominated for an Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. It didn't win. Wild Tales. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
You have to watch Wild Tales. Beautiful film. I'll give my last one. It's a slight reference, but you can go with yours first, and then I'll tell you why. My last one.
So I would maybe pair this with Terrestrial Verses. It's made by Ali Reza Khatami, who's a filmmaker that we know. That film is another anthology film.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a series of vignettes. Each short within the film is a single angle of a character right to camera, and it's commentary on the societal constraints of Iran. So I think it would be interesting to show like, okay, here's like vignettes of the lives of people who are in positions of authority. And now here's vignettes of the lives of people who are affected by positions of authority.
That's a good one. I hadn't even thought of that one.
Yeah. Another one that I thought of, but this is a movie that I haven't seen yet. I plan to see it, is Zone of Interest.
Yes, I've seen Zone of Interest.
Because I know you've seen it, so you tell me if I'm on the money with this or not. Because this watching this actually made me want to watch Zone of Interest even more, because it's a movie where it's kind of from the perspective of people who are kind of
Nazis. It's in the perspective of Nazis.
People who are lackadaisical about like horrible things that are happening around them.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good, for that same reason. Yeah, from the perspective of the villain.
Yeah,
for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
My last one is Monsters Ball. Have you heard of Monsters Ball?
No.
Okay, that's the one I thought you would know.
No, you're dropping 3 movies that I haven't ever heard of.
Mark Foster. It stars Halle Berry, Heath Ledger shortly before he died, and Billy Bob Thornton.
Okay.
And basically, there's one specific scene, because Billy Bob Thornton plays an executioner in an American system, and he's trying to teach his son to become, like, take up the family, you know, like become the next. And while they're giving this man his final walk, you know, that final walk to the electric chair.
Yeah.
Heath Ledger is doing it for the first time ever, and he collapses halfway through because he's sick to his stomach with this idea. And it's just like the scene out of the second short story, except Heath Ledger pukes all over the place. He pukes on the side of the walls. He pukes on the, and Billy Bob Thornton's walking alongside them. And later on, Billy Bob chastises him. He like throws him against the wall, and he's like yelling at his son, saying like, "You just destroyed that man's like last walk, his dignity. You know how important it is for this." And I couldn't stop thinking about Monsters Ball during that second short.
Whoa.
Because it literally, that scene is very similar, but it's like played to like the next degree.
That's a really cool scene.
It's great. It's so great because Billy Bob Thornton takes him aside and like is so mad at him for saying that, like, even though this guy is whatever, a killer, or like he's a bank robber or something, and even though we're taking an execution, it's like the respect you need to give another human when they're doing that final walk is like, you fucked it up. You didn't service this guy properly. You weren't man enough to do this walk. It's really interesting. And that's like the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Interesting.
That's like setting the stage for this family dynamic. And Heath Ledger's so good in this, and I think he died.
Who's Heath Ledger?
The actor?
I'm joking. I just wanted to see how you'd react.
I wasn't sure if you were saying like, who is he in the movie, or who is he like as a person?
I've never heard of this guy before.
Modern Hollywood remake. Can it be? Should it be? How it be?
It just came out.
Yeah, I say no. I think this is too specific for the here and now in Iran. And like, if you were going to do an American remake, you can do one about the American capital punishment system, which is its own interesting thing. But it wouldn't be a remake of this film. It would just be its own anthology film about the American criminal system.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I think that there's been a lot of those films, like I mentioned, Monsters Ball. Like they've already done these versions of movies that touch on American capital punishment. So, no, is my take. You can't really make a modern Hollywood remake of this.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe like in 20 years, maybe. Not right now.
Final thoughts and grades. I give this A-. I think it's an excellent film. I was really surprised from the get-go. It never lost my attention for a second. I think some of the films are stronger than the others, but that's just the nature that happens with any anthology film. I would highly recommend this to anyone who likes cinema or likes gut-wrenching stories. And I think Rasoulof deserves all of the accolades and credit and awards that he got for this film because it's truly excellent. I think in comparing to the other film we did of his, White Meadows, I still think White Meadows is a more poetic, beautiful top to tail, but also that's a full feature, whereas these are four short films. So not really comparable, but excellent film, A-. Farn, final thoughts and grades.
I didn't know what to expect going into this film. I knew nothing about it. I knew I really liked Rasoulof's White Meadows, so I was actually expecting something kind of in that realm, I guess, something that was highly allegorical. So I wasn't actually expecting to see something this literal. Mm-hmm. And even with it being a literal film, there was still a lot of allegory to kind of expound from the film. I like the anthology approach to films sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't land for me. In this case, I think it did really land. The best films within this were very good. And I think the worst films were not as good. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like in my head, I kind of had to give each of the four sections its own grade and then average it out. And so as a result, the score that I'm giving this is a B++. I think had the final segment been better, I might have actually given this maybe even an A+. Like that final segment, the pacing in it was egregious enough that it really weighed down the rest of the film for me. And I think part of it also comes back to what you said, Kaveh, about how you need to end your film on a high note. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't necessarily move that first one to the end. I would have maybe found a better way to do that end. And actually, this reminds me of another nitpick I was going to make. I don't like the fact that in the last film, we don't see the reveal to the daughter. It's done off camera, and I think that was a mistake. And I think that could have been the powerful ending of the film, is that you show that scene where that reveal happens in an argument instead of, what do you want me to do? She's my daughter, blah, 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 blah. And then she goes off and like tells her off camera, right? I think that there was an opportunity there to explore a very intense, uncomfortable scene that would have made this film an A+ in my books. I was a little disappointed that it didn't, but otherwise, those first three were so good.
For the record, I'll just say I don't know if I agree with you. I think there was something your mind fills in how that scene would play out, and so therefore you get the best version of how that scene played out. Okay. Possibly there's a chance also the actor might have not had the chops to pull it off.
It's possible. It's possible they shot it.
I mean, there's a chance. I think like it's a tough scene, and there's a really good there's a great screen story editor named Al McGee who works in this industry who often gave me once this really great lesson in like writing scripts, especially in first drafts. He's like, don't have everybody screaming and shouting. He's like, don't write screaming and shouting. Make your fight scenes quiet. And if later on, if the director finds that they need to turn it up a notch, maybe they'll do that. But in your scripts, don't have everybody screaming at each other. Why could you do this to me? I can't believe you do this. But you never trusted me. Like, don't have that in your script. Yeah. Because you can't trust that the performer will be able to do that. Also comes off as very like soap opera-y.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And he's like, sometimes like the quieter moments in life just hit harder. And not this, I mean, this is such a quiet moment that you're actually removed from it. And therefore your brain is filling in the gaps of how that scene probably played out.
Hey, that scene could have still been quiet. I just wanted to see it. I think that it was that reveal. I wanted to see it.
But then you run into the problem of maybe the performer couldn't do it.
That's true. That's very true.
Shot in secret and smuggled out of Iran, There Is No Evil is an anthology film comprising 4 moral tales about men faced with a simple yet unthinkable choice. Stories that are variations on the crucial themes of moral strength and the death penalty that ask to what extent individual freedom can be expressed under a despotic regime and its seemingly inescapable threats. The haunting and atmospheric film actually presents itself as an illustration and gives a genuine look at those Iranians who serve as executioners and those who show courage to refuse. It gives rise to those questions, the terror of what it means to live in a world where every resolution brings new questions. Rasoulof challenges the viewer's morality as well as its characters and fortifies them to take action. There Is No Evil is also a very captivating thriller. Sets the premise of each story really well, slowly unfolds the painful secrets and truths while focusing on family, love, freedom, to make each story deliver their individual effectiveness. But Rasoulof left us many questions with no actual answers. He explains that the film is about people taking responsibility for their actions and that each story is based on his own experience. For me, he is the most prominent revolutionary filmmaker of Iran, an angry fist of protest lashing out at the Islamic government and turning its back on its farcical laws. From a man who is willing to lose everything to stand up for cinema and stand up for what's right. I want to personally thank Mr. Rasoulof for all of the sacrifices he's made for cinema in Iran. Farhan, I don't know if you echo thanking Rasoulof.
Absolutely. And I would love to have him on the podcast at some point, especially now that he's out of Iran. I think that it is feasible at some point. Yeah. I'm very, very, very happy that he made it out. One quick little message to, if there is anyone out there who has any kind of influence at studios or production companies, a lot of times when Iranian filmmakers make it out of the country, they get kind of abandoned by all these cinephiles who praise Iranian filmmakers making things in Iran. This man is out of Iran now. He's a master of the art. Give him the means and the resources and the money to make things unshackled. This man deserves to see his visions come to the screen, and it would be a mistake not to help him do it.
To all of our listeners who are the billion-dollar studio owners who are out giving jobs to people, we know you're all out there listening to us. I echo what Farhan says. Give this man a job, damn it. Farhan, thank you very much for discussing this film with me. You know how I feel about you.
Sure do. Thank you, Kaveh.
To our listeners, thank you very much for tuning in. Be umid didar.
Bye. Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.